welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for this information session on the Master of Fine Arts and Creative Writing at the University of St. Thomas in Houston. So just to introduce myself, my name is Brenda Venegas and I am recruitment counselor at USTMAC Center. We are a microcampus of the University of St. Thomas located about an hour north of Houston. And in our microcampus, we promote the online degrees that the university offers. And we also do a few other things here in the community. We're a space for current students and an outpost for alumni. And so today we are here to learn about the Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing. So we have a very special guest with us today, Mr. James Matthew Wilson. And before I turn it over to him, I do want to do a small intro so that you can know a little bit about him. So James Matthew Wilson, he's one of the founding faculty members of the MFA program in creative writing at the University of St. Thomas in Houston. He has published 10 books, among them 4 collections of poems, including The Strangeness of the Good. His poems, essays, and reviews appear regularly in a wide range of magazines and journals. And he is the winner of the 2017 Hyatt Prize from the Dallas Institute of Humanities and Culture. He also serves as poet in residence of the Benedict XVI Institute for Sacred Music and Divine Worship. He is poetry editor of Modern Age magazine and series editor of Coliseum Books, a new imprint that publishes the best contemporary poetry and literary criticism of serious craft and spiritual depth. So thank you, James Wilson. We are happy to have you, and I'll turn it over to you now.
Great. Thanks, Brenda. So in a couple minutes, I want to share my screen with you to sort of walk you through the program, but I just want to say a few introductory words. First of all, thanks to everybody for joining us. I recognize a couple faces at least, or at least names from social media and other places. It's wonderful to have you all here. I can see from the chat box that there are people from all over the place, and that is in keeping with what's happened so far since we started this program a mere 7 months ago. A year ago, this program was still a secret, but I was getting ready to announce it, and we were preparing the initial text. And so naturally, since it was still kind of a secret, it didn't exist except on paper and by a signature. I can say a mere 8 or so months later, or a year later from when we first started thinking about this program, that we've been overwhelmed by the response. And I think that's because this program is not only a distinctive one within the array of Master of Fine Arts programs that are currently being administered in this country, but that it actually stands apart as one of the most distinguished and promising. And I don't mind tooting my own horn here, because you'll see in a minute that a lot of what I'm bragging about is the kinds of people who have been drawn to the program and have made it what it has already become. The program was founded with my former publisher at Wise Blood Books, Joshua Wren, who was formerly also a professor at Belmont Abbey College in North Carolina. And I was just a year ago sitting just outside Philadelphia at Villanova University. But the University of St. Thomas invited us to found a new Master of Fine Arts program that would do, you might say, 2 things in the broadest possible strokes. One would be to take the best of what's available in contemporary graduate education for Master of Fine Arts programs and slightly improve them. But second, the program was founded with a categorically different spirit from other Master of Fine Arts programs. And what I mean is this. First of all, as many of you probably know, the literary arts in our culture in our day have by and large been overtaken by the divisive partisanship of our age, so that everything seems to be being reduced to politics or swallowed up in politics. We wanted to found a program where people who love literature and know it changes your life, their lives, and the lives of others could find a refuge to really study the arts and master the craft that makes beautiful works of art. So we are a craft first program. And by craft, we don't mean that word vaguely. We mean, we believe that a well-made thing is a good in itself and a good that has power to transform everyone who encounters it. If you know that wonderful poem of Rilke, a sonnet from the early 20th century on an archaic torso of Apollo, he describes this marmoreal torso, one that you can actually see in the Vatican Museum, as I did many years ago on my honeymoon, the Belvedere torso. He describes this magnificent but fractured piece of art, and he describes it in intricate detail. And at the end of this already short 14-line poem, the last line is simply, "You must change your life." Joshua and I founded this program with the belief that every art is like a gauntlet thrown down before the rest of the human race to stop, to think more deeply, and to enter more deeply into the mystery of being. And that this can only be done by excellent works of art, not by politically charged works of art or arts that are simply works of art that are simply trying to keep up with the present trends of our age. And especially not that, frankly, because the trends of our age need serious amendment if the arts are going to resume the place, if literature is going to resume the place that it once had in our culture. It doesn't just need mild improvement, it needs kind of reform. A second and equally fundamental dimension to our program alongside craft is Catholicism. There are 300 MFA programs in this country. There are 100 online MFA programs in this country. And while I'd love to lead off by stating a pretty obvious fact, despite the fact that we think we're offering the best MFA program in the country, we're also the least expensive one. That's not where I want to lead. Where I want to lead off with is our Catholicism. And what I mean by that is this. And I think I want to make it a twofold thing. First, the Catholic tradition is a capacious one. It's one that holds the best of antiquity, the best of pre-Christian culture and civilization, and also all the achievement of Christendom, everything that's happened since the birth of Christ. It takes these things, it holds these things together, and it makes them its own. So it's a deep and rich tradition with boundless stores of wealth in its past, all there waiting for someone to come along, study it, learn it, improve upon it, and continue this tradition of great literature and the arts. But more than that, some of you may know the 20th century theologian Hans Urs von Balthazar, an obscure Swiss name that sounds bizarre to many people, including most of my students. But once you get to know Hans, the name begins to just trip off the tongue because he was such a brilliant thinker. Von Balthazar says in the 5th volume of one of his longest works, a 7-volume book called The Glory of the Lord, a Theological Aesthetics. He says in that 5th volume, on an obscure page late in the volume, he says, Christians are charged with being the guardian of metaphysics in the modern world. That may seem like a rather strange claim. What does that even mean? What it means is this. As people in our age retreat into their pet ideologies, into their private doctrines, they feel less and less obligation to be open to being and truth. But Christians are committed to the knowledge of being, of all that is created, and of being itself, the God who makes all things. What that means is that we have an obligation to maintain an openness, a universal scope, a breadth and a depth in our perception and our understanding of reality. And so while some people can try to reduce the world to politics or reduce the world to, I don't know, their nerve endings and their own expressive individualism, the Catholic Church reminds us that we're creatures in the world who have an obligation to the whole of reality. That is a great blessing for every artist, Catholic or otherwise, because what that tells us is that art is a way in which we come to know the real. And so we are committed to what Joshua Wren calls a contemplative realism, a sense of the arts as having a great scope that enters into the depth of human experience, but also goes deeper than that. That goes into the heights of human experience, but transcends those heights and enters into the furthest reaches of the cosmos and beyond as it tries to encounter the mystery of the divine. So craft and Catholicism is sort of the shortest possible introductory summary to what we want to do in this MFA program. When I made this announcement a year ago, again, we had nobody in the program because the program existed on nothing but a sheet of paper. By August, we had, despite ourselves, 50 people enrolled in the program. We didn't want that many people enrolled in the program. We wanted to keep our cohort small, but two things happened. First, the logistics of planning the program were complicated. And second of all, as it happens, we kept getting these incredible applications in July, and then even after the deadline on the 1st of August. And I couldn't turn people away. We wanted them involved in this. And it's been incredible. From day one, each student who's applied to and entered the program, I'm not kidding, everyone seems to say the same thing. I always wanted to study writing. I wanted to study the craft of poetry. I wanted to study the art of fiction. I wanted to study literature as a real thing and not just an incidental aspect of politics or sociology or anthropology. I wanted to go where taking the arts seriously was not going to be scoffed at as if it were a cute sentiment. And further, I want to go someplace where I could write about, think about, and talk about God and not feel like at every other minute I have to justify that action. I mean, it's incredible. It's just the same story again and again and again. And when classes opened last August, from day one, it was incredible what happened. We designed this program out of knowledge of what you might call a basic fact of literary experience. And that is most writers work and toil alone in isolation. And so we wanted to found a program that was online, primarily online, though not exclusively, so that as many people could join the program from anywhere in the country or even anywhere in the world as possible. And I'll just say we even have a student in Tel Aviv, Israel, and one in Dublin, Ireland. So we're practically a world empire. And yet we did not want in any way to shortchange or take shortcuts around the great experience that I had as a Master of Fine Arts student. I studied in 2 different programs as a Master of Fine Arts student, and then also did my PhD. So I had a considerable experience, not to mention I taught at a residential college for the last 12 years at Villanova University. So I had a considerable experience and attachment to the traditional residential model academic program, including graduate program. So we wanted to maintain every aspect of the residential program that we possibly could without forcing people to quit their jobs, abandon their family, and move across the country or down to Houston, Texas, or wherever the program might have been located. What we've been able to do is to achieve that. All of our classes are run in the traditional residential graduate seminar manner, by which I mean this. When I was a student at Notre Dame, one night a week, I went to a room on campus and there we sat for 3 hours and talked about books. That's what we do in the program. Though, if you join us in the program, you'll see this background, which is my office, instead of on a screen rather than being in the room. What that looks like, in fact, is that our classes officially start at 6 o'clock Central Time, 7 p.m. Eastern. The students usually start logging in before that time so they can have a chance to visit. And they usually end up staying on past 8:45 Central Time when our classes end, sometimes for as much as an hour. Why are they doing that? Well, there's 2 reasons. First of all, everybody's just so thrilled to be able to talk about the art they love and to talk about it extensively and at leisure and in the company of fellow travelers and fellow amateurs, lovers of the art. But second of all, the community that has built up in such a short time has just been incredible. The people who are fellow students online have become friends offline, even if they're in different parts of the country. The whole program can be completed online, but we have created a residential option, which means simply the following: for up to 2 of your classes, and it's a 10-class degree, for up to 2 of your classes, you can come to Houston and join me in late June every summer. I know Houston in late June doesn't sound very attractive, but then again, Houston in August sounds worse. So, so take what you can get. So you come to Houston in late June, and for 10 days, we are together kind of night and day, and it's incredible. Morning starts with breakfast, and then all the students who are in the residency, whether fiction writers or poets, get together for a seminar to study great works of literature, different ones selected each year for the residency. So this year, for instance, we're going to be studying Catholicism, Eastern European, and Far East. So we're going to study John Paul II's Jeweler Shop and some of his poems, and then Czesław Miłosz, the Nobel Prize winning Polish poet. We're going to study them for 5 days. And then Far East, we're going to read Endo's Silence and Sono's Miracles, two of the classic Japanese novels, two of the greatest of Japanese novels of the 20th century that just also happen to be about Jesuit missionaries and St. Maximilian Kolbe. So that's the morning seminar for this coming year. In the afternoon, the students divide up, and the fiction writers go one way, the poets the other, and they get together for intensive afternoon workshops after having 3 hours off to prepare for those workshops. After that's over, we have a little break, and then we have dinner at the wonderful Linkley Mansion on St. Thomas's campus before going to one of several events that are coordinated with the residency that are part of the newly established summer literary series at the University of St. Thomas. So this year, we're going to have Dana Gioia, former chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts, giving our keynote reading. We'll have the poet Catherine Savage Brosman, one of the great Southern poets of the 20th and 21st century, joining us. We're going to have lectures by Robert Royal, by Czesław Miłosz biographer Cynthia Haven, a reading by the Canadian novelist Natalie Morel, who will actually be teaching the program with us this summer too. And then a lecture by Kevin Doak, who's actually the translator of the two, one of the two Japanese novels we'll be reading this summer. So he knows the author, Sono, quite well. So what you get then is a program that's, up to 100% online, but at minimum 80% online, and already great things are happening in our time together during the graduate seminars and workshops online. But then we have this summer residential option for those who want to join us. That's just a great opportunity for both conviviality and festivity, not to mention serious study. I want to share my screen here and see if I can just take you through a couple of things on the on our website, just so you'll be familiar with it. The main thing I'd like to show you is this. When we designed this program, we wanted it to be, I mentioned earlier, craft and Catholicism. There's a third C. I love alliteration. Maybe I should have been an Anglo-Saxon poet, but there's a third C, coherence, that we wanted to emphasize. Joshua and I wanted to design the kind of program that we wish we'd had as students. And we wanted to fulfill that nagging feeling that all those students who joined us had, that they thought they'd never find a program that was right for them. We wanted to design the program that was right for them. And so coherence, here's what I mean by that. If you look here, I'll show you 2 tracks. Here's our current poetry track. Our students, all students entering our program, take a class called the Craft of Poetry, which I don't like the phrase boot camp too much, but I'm going to use it just because I'm not feeling very imaginative right now, alas, for a creative writing professor. But Craft of Poetry is an all-purpose boot camp, an introduction to the forms, the meter, and the genres of poetic craft. It's for our students who haven't learned meter before, you'll know it when you're done. For those who have learned meter before, you're going to know it backwards and forwards, because I really emphasize mastering poetic rhythm and the use of rhyme and stanza, etc. And then for full-time students, you take Craft of Poetry and your first graduate workshop. In the year 1 spring, you take a second workshop, and then you have a choice whether to take the Catholic Imagination in Modern American Literature or the European Catholic Literary Revival, both of which are great classes. This coming fall, we have a new faculty member joining us for the semester, and I pray for longer. the distinguished Flannery O'Connor and Walker Percy scholar, Jessica Hooton Wilson, is going to teach our class, The Catholic Imagination of Modern American Literature. It's a huge coup for us to get her. She's hard to track down these days because she's so busy writing books. And then, as I say, you have an optional graduate residency in Houston. And then in year 2 fall, all poetry students and all fiction students take a class in the philosophy of art and beauty. This is a class I'm going to be teaching it for the first time this fall, and I'm very much looking forward to implementing this in a program. It's not a philosophy class that stands back abstractly just saying what is beauty and looking at a menu of the various answers that have been given. Everybody in our program knows that art does things. We've seen it operate in our own lives, and we've seen it operate in the lives of others. So we designed a class that includes the greatest contributions to the philosophy of art and beauty that explain why art does what it does, why encounters with the beautiful matter, beginning with Plato and Aristotle and going up through the 20th century, including the great thinkers Jacques Maritain and Etienne Gilson, as well as Benedict XVI in the Spirit of the Liturgy. And we conclude also with that fellow I mentioned earlier, Hans Urs von Balthazar, and his theological aesthetics. Then I have all second-year poetry students also take a class called Poetry and Meditation, which is an introduction to the philosophy, theology, and practice of lyric poems. And it traces the deep archaeology in human thought that led the modern lyric poem as it emerged in poets, well, this is a bit belated, but such as John Donne and George Herbert, and the modern lyric tradition. In year 2 spring, Foundations of the Catholic Literary Tradition is sort of our great books class that fills in some of those gaps that we want all of our students to have filled. You'll read Virgil, you'll read Augustine's Confessions, Dante's Divine Comedy, space allowing Manzoni's The Betrothed, which is the greatest Italian novel of the 19th century and also the great Catholic story of the 19th century. Students who don't do the residencies then have a 5th semester where they take their thesis, and they can take one other workshop and one other seminar. So perhaps the European literary tradition or the American literary tradition. And then you finally complete a directed thesis. By the time you're done with, let me talk about fiction, then I'll just say 2 summary words and we'll open things up for questions. With fiction, much of what I said still applies. The key difference is that instead of the craft of poetry, you take the art and metaphysics of fiction, which is Joshua Wren's wonderful class that runs right through Aristotle and Aquinas up to contemporary literary critics such as James Wood, and really is an inside out exploration of how fiction works and how it resonates with human nature, how it becomes convincing when it tells us the truth, you might say, when it lies to tell us the truth. And then in other respects, however, the fiction program follows roughly the same trajectory as the poetry program. It's just you have fiction workshops instead of poetry workshops, a fiction thesis instead of poetry thesis, and the fiction writers do have one additional option to finish their degree. So they can usually take both the European and the American the Catholic Revival courses. I need to say one more thing before I open things up for questions, and that's what happens when you go through this program. Well, I already said what's going to happen to you during the program, and that is you're going to be introduced to a whole community of like-minded people who are here with a common mission to make good art with the depths of the spirit present within it. But there's a practical end to this too. And I can say that we're the only MFA program in the world that prepares our students the way we do. When you're done with our program, as would be the case with any MFA program, if you're a poet, you will have a book-length original manuscript of poetry that has been revised and read over by your professors multiple times and is ready to start to being submitted to magazines and shopped around to publishers. But there's one thing special that we do that can't go without mentioning, and that's this. Most Master of Fine Arts programs require their students to take one workshop a semester, just as we do. But then they say, and then go take a graduate seminar with the doctoral students in the University of Iowa, the University of Michigan, wherever. Well, doctoral classes in literature are incredibly obscure, arcane, even irrelevant in their interests. They're seldom talking about what makes a work of art good, what causes it to do what it does. They're usually involved in some sort of ideology anatomizing. We don't do that in our program. All of our critical seminars are designed to make sure that our original creative writing students are prepared to be excellent reviewers, excellent critics of literature for newspapers, magazines, and journals. And so all of our writing in those seminars will result in essays of different types: the close reading, the literary appreciation, biography, and evaluation, or the literary manifesto, or reflection on craft. That's the sort of three broad categories we use. What that will lead to is that by the time you're done with the program, you'll have somewhere around 12 to 15 essays that will all be written, intended for a lay audience, that you can begin trying to publish in magazines, online and in print, and that taken together will constitute a second other book, a book of your reflections on what literature means, on what particular authors means, on what the relationship is between art and life, literature and the spirit, religion and human nature, and so on and so forth. I consider this absolutely essential because very few fiction writers or poets cultivate their reputation just through their original creative work. Almost without exception, especially I say as a poor poet here, almost without exception, a reputation is established first by writing good critical prose, so that when somebody sees your name in the page of the Wall Street Journal and reads something by it, and then they come across a poem by you in a magazine later, they don't just flip past the poem. They say, hey, that's the guy whose thing I read in the Wall Street Journal, and they stop and read the poem. Hey, I read this guy's essay, and now I see he's got a short story in the Sewanee Review or the New Yorker or whatever. I'm going to stop and read that. This is just a practical way in which your critical work, your work as a practicing artist can overflow into your work as a practicing critic. And the two things combined form an organic whole, which will help establish you as a writer. There are all kinds of other things that can come from the program, but that's the real crucial one for us, because what Joshua and I did was we designed the curriculum to result in everybody coming out of our program prepared to enjoy the same kind of career as writers, as editors, and as publishers that Joshua and I have gotten to enjoy. So the application process couldn't be simpler. There's only 3 things we care about. Well, sorry, there are 4 things we have to care about. First of all, you have to have an undergraduate degree, and you have to forward your transcript to the St. Thomas Graduate Admissions Office. That's for federal compliance. It's a law it's not a law, but the University of St. Thomas accreditation demands that all graduate students already have a bachelor's degree. Okay. I never look at that. I don't pay any attention to that. What we pay attention to are really just 2 things: your statement of purpose and the writing you've done so far. We're not going to admit anybody to the program whose work we see and we say, I just don't think that this can go anywhere. We don't want to spread any false hopes, and we don't want to, abuse those hopes in any way. But that's the first thing we look at: is the work any good? Does it show potential? And then the second thing is the statement of purpose. We're comfortable being a program that's not for everybody, although we think we really are for everybody. We're comfortable being a special sort of program, and I think we should be, because there are a lot of people who are hungry and thirsty for the kind of literature and the kind of community that we want to build. And so we're looking for people who want to join us on this common enterprise. We really think that we're part of a renaissance in arts and letters in our day. And I don't think we're delusional there. I think we're seeing it before our eyes. There are great poets, there are great fiction writers who are publishing more and more today. And I'm pleased to say, Joshua and I have some responsibility for that. As I said earlier, Joshua was my publisher at Wise Blood Books, and Wise Blood Books continues to be a great small press that's publishing distinguished novels, short story collections, and books of poems. I am the editor of Coliseum Books, which is a smaller imprint that just publishes poetry and literary criticism, but we published some great authors so far, including just recently, we published the poet Ryan Wilson's Prometheus Bound, which is his collected translations. It's a 230-page book that includes verse translations of everything from Homer up to contemporary German, Spanish, and Italian poetry. It's an amazing book. I think it's going to make a big splash. So we know what the life of publishing, of magazine editing, and so we aim to help our students, get oriented to both the practice of literature and also to the publishing of literature.
So thank you, James. So I wanted to share this screenshot because if you are interested in applying anytime on the stthom.edu or anywhere on the stthom.edu website, you'll always see this button here and it'll take you to the application. And then this address right here is for the website that James showed us earlier. So that's where you'll find more information about the program, more information about what are the requirements, the cost, the courses in this MFA in creative writing. James, if you could answer one question, is it a requirement to have an English background or writing background to be in this program? And second, if you can also mention or say a few words about the Summer Writers Institute that you have this summer.
Oh, great. Okay. It's not necessary to have been an English major. All you have to be is literate. Okay. If you know how to write, we want you in the program. If you know how to write well, we really want you in the program. Previous academic background is not really a concern for us. In some ways, it might even be undesirable to have a literature background, depending on where you went to school. So that's certainly the case. And then, yes, thanks for bringing up the Summer Writers Institute. So through the generosity of one of our donors, we're able to offer this beginning this summer, and the application deadline is actually right around the corner, and we only have a few spots left. But nonetheless, beginning this summer, we're going to offer a 3-day intensive Summer Writers Institute every year just before the start of our graduate residency. And that 3-day course will consist of seminars on the philosophy of art and beauty, a study in literary form, whether in fiction or poetry, as well as workshops. You'll have a chance to get your own work workshopped and studied and critiqued by me, by Joshua, by whoever's teaching the program in a given year. And then 2 of the 3 nights will have keynote readings. This year, we're going to have Micheal O'Shiel, the great Irish poet, reading, and then Joshua Wren, my colleague, is going to give our fiction reading. What's wonderful about the Summer Writers Institute is all it costs is whatever it takes for you to get to Houston, and then the cost of the residence hall room. There's no tuition for it, and that include and the meals. Once you're on campus, meals and cocktails, everything's free. Oh, did I get everything? Yeah, that was everything, wasn't it? Okay.
Yes, thank you. So also you can find more information about that Summer Writers Institute on that stthom.edu/MFA website. And I know we probably did not get to all of the questions. So you can find James Wilson's information there. Also, our information is here at the bottom, Mac Center at stthom.edu. So I'm also happy to direct you to anyone to answer your questions, or I'll find somebody. But we'll go ahead and start finishing this session. I just wanted to invite everybody to connect with us on social media. We're on UST Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram at UST Mac Center. And thank you all for joining us today, especially James Matthew Wilson for sharing with us about this program. And we look forward to seeing you either in the MFA or at the Institute this summer. James, did you have any other thing to say before we close out?
No, thank you so much, Brenda. This was great. I hope I'll be seeing some of your names cross my desk in the months or years ahead. I thought this was great. I'm so excited to see you all here.
Yes, thanks for joining us, and I hope everybody has a good weekend.